controversial. It was the first X-rated movie to be acknowledged by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. It challenged every sexual norm usually depicted in films and ended up winning 3 Oscars for Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Director, and Best Picture. And it also got Harry Nilsson a Grammy for Best Contemporary Vocal Performance for that song. Now, tonight, I have heard the Oscars are being presented in Hollywood and will be broadcast all over the world. Now, times have changed a bit since 1969 when I was 3. And what seemed so shockingly racy back then now looks kind of naive. In those days, there were 5 nominees in every category, and now there are 10 nominees for Best Picture. And movies are still controversial for tackling tough issues of our times, including the toughest issues, the issue that never goes away, our original sin, racism. Even when the Academy itself has been complacent in acknowledging the racism in itself. Michelle Yeoh, a 60-year-old Malaysian actress, is nominated for Best Actress, and it's an action film. A 60-year-old female Asian action hero. Like, isn't that awesome? And yet, despite the fact that in the last 3 years, there have been lots of movies with Black heroes and amazingly powerful Black actors, a few of them are nominated. Fewer of them have won. So one of the big standouts this year is Danielle Deadwyler, the actor who absolutely carried the film Till, which was released last October. She commanded every single scene as the mother of Emmett Till, the 14-year-old Chicago boy who was brutally tortured and murdered in Mississippi in 1955. You saw that movie, you know, Danielle Deadwyler was absolutely incredible. The power and vulnerability of her character in every single scene was overwhelming, especially when you consider that she was playing a real person, a person we've all seen in black and white footage and read about in history books. Ms. Deadwyler brought something new to a person that we thought we knew. Now, everybody I talked to thought she'd win an Oscar. Every review I read said she would win an Oscar. So when the list of nominees came out in January and she wasn't on it, everybody was shocked, like absolutely shocked. And yet not shocked. Because of course, this happens all the time. In recent years, there have been a few Black women who've been nominated for Best Actress and Best Supporting Actress. But still, Halle Berry is the only Black woman in history to win that top prize, ever. But many members of the Academy seem to be experiencing a kind of racial justice fatigue. So somehow they claim they didn't get around to seeing Till. And often they claim that they didn't see it because they know how the story ends. Danielle Deadwyler, on the other hand, says they didn't see it because of what she calls misogynoir. Because of what's been going on behind the scenes, I have to say I tend to believe her. You see, the producers of the film Till Leslie put a ton of financial resources into creating a lot of talk about her through social media and informal kind of free outlets. But they put a lot of money into that still, so that the film's star and Andrea Riseborough, a very classically pretty white woman, would get a lot of buzz. Now, that kind of campaign was unheard of before Harvey Weinstein started using his power and money to bully Academy members into voting for his projects. And now it's the norm. So Ms. Riseborough is a familiar type of person. She's non-threatening, she's easy to admire, she's very pretty, very approachable for white people, and white people are the majority. It's all proof that there's no democracy in the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. The people and projects with the most money and the most buzz win. But that's Hollywood, right? That's fantasy, that's escapism. If we want to see how democracy works in the real world, especially in the face of big life-threatening challenges, let's just look at COVID-19, shall we? This week, as I said, marks 3 years since the world shut down, when national, state, and local governments shut down all non-essential functions, including schools, businesses, stores, transit. While scientists scrambled to figure out exactly how the virus spread, remember how obsessed we all were with doorknobs? We just stayed home to flatten the curve, as they said, to minimize upfront the number of people who contracted the virus, all while a vaccine was being developed. And when it became clear that masks were the most effective means of reducing transmission, lots of people jumped on board and did the right thing. And a whole lot of people didn't. Here in the United States, we've been pretty evenly divided, by my estimation, between people who want to do the right thing and take responsibility, not just for themselves, but for the most at risk around them, and people on the other end who, for a whole variety of reasons, simply won't wear a mask. They think the coronavirus is a hoax, that deaths have been blown out of proportion. They don't want to cover their beautiful faces. They think we're teaching their kids to be afraid of everything. Lots and lots of opinions. And everybody's opinion in all of that discussion seemed to matter equally. Even the ones that were based on fear, ignorance, disinformation, even the opinions that were obviously based on self-service with reckless disregard for human life were given airtime and even amplified. Things like drinking bleach. But ministers aren't supposed to talk about elected officials. As a consequence, the United States, which is less than 5% of the world's population, has borne more than 16% of the deaths. And numerous studies have shown that democracies with more trust in government have fared way better than nations with less trust. Sweden, New Zealand, Thailand, and Michelle Yeoh's place of birth, Malaysia, have all done enormously better than the United States at keeping COVID-19 at bay. Because when things were at their worst, we valued our freedom more than we valued each other. We protected our right to express and act on our opinions more than we protected the lives of our neighbors. No wonder there's so little trust in government or each other. Now, things are looking way better now. The numbers are finally dropping. The virus seems to be losing a lot of its deadliness with each mutation. But we could have gotten through this more quickly and with fewer deaths if we'd just done what the experts told us to do and kept our opinions to ourselves, especially our stupid, lazy, self-serving opinions. How's that for harsh? But it's true. We human beings tend to value our own opinions and give them more credibility and authority than the opinions of others. And what is voting if not an expression of opinion? And that is exactly what makes democracy so difficult, even in our congregations. Now, I could tell you all kinds of terrible stories of conflicts in congregations caused by differences of opinion. And most of them, if I'm honest, start with somebody somewhere saying, well, you know, people are saying. And we've all heard that. We've all said that, right? And a lot of aggravation is fanned in congregations when they're in search for a new minister. So my husband's in search, right? He's looking at all these packets put out by congregations, and every one of them seems to describe their ideal candidate as someone with the best qualities of Joel Osteen, Martin Luther King Jr. and Jesus, but a woman, and preferably non-Christian, motherly but childless. And then when the new minister arrives and is proven to be quite human, the evaluations begin. You know, too Christian, hates Christians, stuck in the past, disrespects our history, never stops talking about oppression, doesn't care about race or social justice. So I want to tell you a story that's a bit more gentle than the nonsense surrounding the Oscars and COVID, and a bit more gentle than some of the evaluations that happen in our congregations. It's a story that took place in the congregation that I used to serve. Margie was a brilliant powerhouse with an outsized influence in the congregation. She was accustomed to being heard until the worship and religious education committees folded and hung 600 origami butterflies and hung them in the center of the space over the altar where the candles of joys and concerns were. And they hovered there in the center of that space for 3 full months, for the entirety of spring. It was absolutely magical when the heat would rise from all those candles and it would make the butterflies flutter. It was absolutely beautiful. Everybody loved it, except for Margie. She said it looked like a kindergarten, and she stayed away for 13 weeks. When she returned, she reminded me very frequently how much she hated those butterflies. Now, don't get me wrong, Margie and I adored each other, had infinite respect for her. She was incredible, absolutely incredible. And I respected her as a person just as much as I respected her decision to stay away. I didn't get her decision, but I respected it. 2 years after that little incident with the origami butterflies, her health was declining rapidly. And her hospice nurse called me at the office. It was likely going to be her last day. She'd been mostly unconscious for the previous 2 days. And, you know, her kids lived in other parts of the country, and she had to have somebody there with her. So I raced over and I sat next to her and I took her hand. And I prayed, not for God to intervene or anything, because that's not my theology, and it sure wasn't her theology. I prayed that she might be free of pain. I prayed that she might be able to die with the same kind of joy and style that she lived with. And I prayed that she might have one last moment of lucidity in which she could say something meaningful. And right on cue, her eyes popped open. She looked confused and she mumbled something incoherent, but then her eyes kind of narrowed and her brow furrowed. And then she recognized me. She smiled and she said, "I hated those damn butterflies." I laughed so hard, I almost wet myself. And she laughed and laughed, and then she fell back to sleep, laughing. I kid you not, she never woke up again. She passed peacefully that evening. So her last words were, "I hated those damn butterflies." But her last moment of lucidity was laughter, a big, deep belly laugh. The thing is that Margie was never really away from the congregation. She hated the butterflies, but she still gave. She fulfilled her pledge. She took part in social events like beverages and banter, her book group, her small group ministry, and especially memorial services when she had to come in. to say goodbye and sit under those butterflies. She just couldn't abide being in the sanctuary on Sunday and having to look at them. That was her opinion. That was her decision. The more important thing, though, is that she didn't try to wreck everybody else's joy. She knew that they loved those butterflies. They loved watching them flutter in the rising heat. That she knew from experience in the congregation that it was a democracy. And sometimes in a democracy, you don't like the outcome. You can't always get your way in a system where there are so many conflicting opinions and contradicting needs. But eventually, things will change. Things always change in a democracy. And when I think about these stories, these very different stories at different scales about the Oscars and COVID-19 and Margie and those damn butterflies, there are a few lessons for me about our fifth principle: the right of conscience and the use of democratic process in our congregations and in society at large. First, when everybody's talking, nobody's listening. And even if somebody is trying to listen, it's really hard to balance the conflicting needs when each is presented as the only legitimate opinion. Even if you're really dedicated to democracy and you're doing your best to really listen, after a while, it all kind of starts to sound like wah, 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 right? Second, being obeyed is not the same as being heard. If you tell me that you hate my shoes, I will hear you and I will still wear them. If you tell me you hate the artwork in the sanctuary, I'll hear you, but I'll also consider the purpose that the artwork serves and all the people who actually do enjoy it. But here in our congregation, there are folks who, for various reasons, will be wearing masks for a long, long time, perhaps until the day that they die. And there are people who, for various reasons, just can't stand wearing masks anymore and are experiencing a kind of mask PTSD. And those are both real, they're both valid. The important thing to remember is that if you haven't gotten your way up until now, or if in the near future your needs won't be met in the way you'd prefer them to be met, it's not because nobody's listening. You've lifted your voice, you've made yourself heard, and we in leadership have heard you. But as Margie knew, we can't be all things to all people all the time. Everyone is valued and things are constantly changing in a democracy. So the third lesson from this morning's three scenarios is this: democracy is ineffective without your right of conscience. Your beliefs inform your opinion. We each have every right to express our beliefs and opinions, but with rights come responsibilities. So we also have the responsibility to educate ourselves. We have the responsibility to actually listen to other people. If everybody's talking, nobody's listening, right? So we all benefit from withholding our opinions sometimes. Have you ever had a wise but quiet sage in your life? You know, the kind of person who doesn't speak much but is really respected, so that when they speak, everybody listens, they lean in to listen and hear every word. Be that person. It benefits democracy. It gives more import to your right of conscience and your freedom of expression. But then again, this is coming from a person to whom you are a captive audience 30 times a year. I get it. Ultimately, the thing about the fifth principle, right of conscience and democratic process, is that it requires being in relationship. Our fifth principle to work in our congregations and in our association requires valuing people as unique individuals and valuing the whole interdependent web of all existence. Living into the dynamic tension as we dismantle racism and other oppressions. We can't have a democracy without respect, equity, and compassion. We can't have a democracy if we aren't working for peace, justice, and liberty. We can't have a democracy if we aren't engaged in our own search for truth and meaning. We can't have a democracy if we don't value truth. All these things, all these principles, they're all interdependent. They work together like a well-oiled machine. And because our association is a democracy, the principles might change. They might go back to 7 instead of 8, or they might go away altogether to be replaced by something else that you hate as much as Margie hated those damn butterflies. Once I've spent 10 non-consecutive weeks talking about these principles, you may find yourself with a newfound love for them, even though there's something that you've never paid attention to much in the past. And then they could just disappear. And that really could happen, because that's how democracy works. So let's rise now and open our gray hymnals to number 149. Lift every voice and sing. Well, let's just sing the first 2 verses, shall we?